Every AA group ought to be fully supporting, declining outside contributions. We will now pass the basket. This is a weekly STEP meeting. Our format is as follows. A speaker is asked to talk for 25 to 30 minutes on the STEP of that week, STEP 3, followed by discussions or question until 7 p.m. You can find these weekly meetings on our YouTube page, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Doylestown. Don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe and share below.
Forgot welcome home.
Welcome home. That brings us to the speaker portion of the meeting on this day, 7/31, 2023, in Doylestown, PA, at the Monday night 6 p.m. Stay Alive Literature and Step Group at St. Paul's Lutheran Church. Tonight's speaker is Chris, and he will be sharing his experience on Step 3. Please help me welcome Chris.
So I'm Chris, I'm an alcoholic.
Hey Chris.
Today I will be obviously talking on Step 3, but to really talk about Step 3, I also got to touch base on Step 2, as well as, go over my story on, because for a long time I was very angry with God. So I was adopted from the day I was born. I was never angry about that. I'd known from the age that I could understand that I had been adopted. So I always looked at my parents as they were my real parents. They raised me, they clothed me, they fed me, they put a roof over my head, and I'm grateful for that. I moved to America when I was 2.5 from England. My parents had already been American citizens. I really wish I still had the United Kingdom citizenship as well. That would be kind of cool, but it didn't work out that way. So my parents, dad's from Latrobe, mom is from Chester. So growing up, I'd grown up in New Jersey, didn't really have much alcoholism in my family. There was the aunt that kind of everybody kept out of any of the circles, or more like she wanted to stay out of everyone's life altogether. So I never got to witness that. And as I was growing up, a lot of the time my dad was working in New York, so I would spend a lot of time with my grandparents, and they were my heroes, especially my grandfather. He was Golden Gloves boxer in Philadelphia. I'd spend a lot of time. He taught me how to garden, taught me almost everything I knew in life. And when I was at the age of 10, his mental, I guess you could say, capacity went down as he got what is called punch drunk. He started getting Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So I kind of started watching my hero just kind of dissolve, and was my first look into institutions. As this was a big guy, and my grandmother was this 4-foot short woman, and he at one point thought the world was flat. So they didn't really know what to do with him. So every weekend I was kind of used as the anchor in the family, because he might not have remembered who my mom was, who my grandmother was, who my dad was, but he always remembered who I was. So what they would end up doing is bringing me in the room so you could see me and be like, that's Chris. So that means that is my daughter, and that would be my wife, and it would all kind of come back. And I still enjoyed it. That was, again, my hero growing up. He was, we'd hang out in a shed. He was a machinist. And this was also a man that literally could have a beer, and that was it. And there was no issues. Soon after he started getting worse, my mom, we ended up moving from New Jersey to Pennsylvania. I was big into sports. I was very active. I was a pitcher. I was in the Babe Ruth League at like 12 years old. And, that was my life. And, my dad, again, still worked in New York. So my mom ended up being diagnosed with MS. So I had to drop out of sports. Grades kind of started dwindling because a lot of my time would be I would come home and then I would have to take care of my mom while my dad was at work. And that was when I was introduced to marijuana. So I started smoking a lot of weed. I would drink here and there, but it wasn't accessible at that age. I kind of dwindled downhill. By the age of 16, I had been expelled from school. Well, I was one suspension away from being expelled, and I pretty much told the principal we might as well just go ahead with it because I'm going to get that within the next 2 weeks. And went to an alternative school. And my mom's health kind of recuperated. She kind of got back on her feet. And I mean, it was always touch and go. But by that point, we had moved my grandmother into the house, and so I would be the one taking care of her. Now, that was really my best friend. That was who I spent a lot of my time with. The woman was blind as a bat, but really could play Wheel of Fortune like no other. I had enjoyed most of those nights with her. I would literally drop out hanging out with friends, going out doing anything because it'd be like, grandma needs someone to be watching. I'm like, all right, I'm cool. She's funny, So I'd watch her. And, through that time, I was doing okay. I wouldn't say great. I was still getting in trouble here and there. My grandmother was always one, he's a good kid. Don't worry about him. And, she was right to an extent. I would say around 19. I had already been hanging out with the wrong people, doing a lot of the wrong things. And I'm not really going to go into that because that's not what this is about. And I started drinking. And it was never, from the gate, it had never been I'm going to have a drink. It was almost like I had this compulsion in me, this complete need to just want more and more. And there were even times that I was like, that's not good, but I didn't care. So I continued. And by the age of 19, I had already been out of the house. I had pretty much been out of the house since I had been 17. I would honestly only come back and hang out with my grandmother here and there. And at the age of 19, my grandmother passed away. And it really affected me, like horribly. I remember to this day being one of the people that was the pallbearers, and I could barely hold myself up because I had found some of her drugs and I drank heavily. And I remember even like during the service being in the back of it just kind of like snoring. Even my mom being like, what's wrong with you? And I wasn't really open. And again, I was out of the house, so I was like, don't worry about that. I was never really too close with either of my parents. They weren't really all together there, or they were going through something. So I just kind of stayed out of their way. And when I was younger, they weren't really that involved. So I'd moved out. And, I just started getting in trouble. And when I turned 21, I just kind of looked at it like, well, you know what? All this other stuff I'm doing, that's for children. Drinking is for adults. That's what I'm going to stick with. And you know what? That was really dumb because that was exactly where I got even worse. Within the first 3 months of turning 21, I had gotten into a bar fight with an off-duty police officer and knocked 5 of his teeth out, and ended up in Dauphin County when I was supposed to be in MCC. They lost me over a 4th of July weekend, and was kind of in lockdown there, and was lucky enough that the bartender showed up to my court hearing, remembering and telling the judge he had already been passed out at the bar. This guy was picking fights with everybody that was there. I had already flagged him. He got up, he left. Other dude went out the back. Here's the camera video of him hitting him from behind. He just ended up being, and of course the people who arrested me, the police that showed up, were his partners, so that didn't help out too well either. But I got out of there by the skin of my teeth. I was looking at 3 to 5 easily. I remember one of my friends coming in there like, we got bail, and I was like, he was an off-duty police officer, like, don't even bother, just leave me. And they were like, okay. And I mean, that was, more money in their pocket. So, during this whole process and everything, with all the loss and everything I'd seen, I'd always blamed all of that on God. I'd always looked at it as, he is smiting me, he is against me. Now, I had grown up in a very Catholic household, went through, I don't even remember what the names of the things were, but yeah, I could get the body of Christ, basically. How I passed any of those tests at CCD or anything is beyond me. I didn't pay attention a single day I was in there, but I did. And even my grandmother, I would take her to church every Sunday. I had been driving since I was 16. I mean, I grew up in a part of New Jersey where a lot of people stole cars, so I knew how to drive when I was a lot younger than 16. But I would take her to church every Sunday. I never paid attention. I never gave into it all. That was more being there for her. So that was always her thing. She was always thankful for that too. And even as I was going and, looking at 3 to 5, I was praying. So I was always one of those people that would pray at the times that were the worst. But any of the other times, I was a complete non-believer. Makes no sense. So when I turned 23, I'd been bouncing around this entire time. Again, the story's probably bouncing around. Again, I'm new to this, so bear with me. I'd lived New York, Baltimore, never Delaware, Talbot County. I lived in Chester. I lived in Philadelphia. I would never stayed in one place too long. And my entire time doing that was from the sense of, I'm going to get a fresh start. But the problem with the fresh start was I kept bringing me to every single place. It was never the fresh start. It was that I needed to change. And I was not willing, open, or anything to, wanting to do that. When I was 23, my daughter was born. And I decided that I didn't want to be the drunk dad. I didn't grow up with a drunk dad. I mean, I love my dad. He might not have been there. I understand that he just kind of had to work. And he's a great guy, don't get me wrong. So is my mom, but she's weird. We still argue on a daily basis. She's an odd bird, and it's usually over something stupid too. And I'm just like, okay, Mom. And it's not even me arguing; it's me just listening to her kind of arguing with herself, and just even nodding my head over the phone. But I wanted to be a part of my daughter's life. I knew me and my daughter's mom were never gonna work. We were very toxic to each other. We both treated each other very badly, but I wanted to at least give my daughter a chance at a decent life, so I went into rehab. And when I got out, I followed what the rehab had told me about doing my 90 and 90. I went to 90 meetings in 90 days. I probably did 90 meetings in about 60. I was down the street from a clubhouse, so it was easy to walk to, and at that point I didn't even have a car, so I was walking to it. At the same time, I was working under the table at a metal shop and walking about 3 miles back and forth from there, either in the middle of the night, midday. But I never got a sponsor, and I never followed any steps, and eventually I fell off from the program. I don't tell people that I was sober for those 8 years. I tell them I abstained, because how I did it is beyond me. There was not a single day that I didn't want a drink. It was almost like you see in the cliche movies where the guy's like, is it gonna be today? And then be like, no. And I think a lot of it is also because I'm very stubborn. And I didn't want to give in, and I constantly thought about it would really let my daughter down. And even though I was only seeing her at that point probably every other weekend, paying child support, doing all the stuff I had to do, I still, I wanted to, but I didn't want to. And again, at this point, I still didn't believe in God. If you had even tried talking to me about God, I would have scoffed at you. I probably would have gotten angry. That Chris might have hit you. And eventually I just kind of switched my addiction to work. And I was working, there were times I was working 4 jobs at a time. I'd go into work 6-7 hours, none of them full time. Go home, back to the apartment, sleep 2-3 hours, wake up, go to the next place, go home, do it all again, every single day, except for the days that I saw my daughter. And eventually I got a full-time job. And in the career field that I work in, there was somebody who kind of was behind me the whole time, mentoring me. I was actually talking with my supervisor today, and she was like, do you remember when you signed up to work here, put in an application? We kind of laughed about it, and I was like, I didn't. And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, Walter. And she's like, what do you mean? Walter applied for me. And she just like looked at me like, what do you mean Walter applied for you? How did he have all your information? He called me up randomly and was like, oh yeah, I'm looking for this and this. And I gave it to him, and he put in the application because he knew I was going to leave the field. And he had always been a good friend of my parents and was always kind of in the background and was pushing me like, you need to go back to meetings. You need to find a sponsor. And I'd always be, okay, whatever you say. Like, I mean, he was an older guy, but, that was my buddy. And he was probably one of the only people that I had in my life that was a straight shooter that told me how it was, would call me on my BS constantly, and make me own it. And, I loved him for that. So eventually I met my wife, and we were dating, everything was good there, we got married. So I built this life, I got this house, I've got my daughter in my life. I mean, she's back and forth. She's at the age of 15 now, so she doesn't want anything to do with her dad, and that's okay. She still calls me on a regular basis here and there, being like, I love you, I want $30. And I'm like, I'll Venmo you, you're good. We're good like that. Eventually she'll come around. She'll always reach out if it's, something important, or if she's in a crisis mode, and that can go strangely. But anyway, I digress. So my wife's mother, who was probably one of the sweetest woman I've ever met, old school Kensington, really tough, but very, very nice. She'd tell you she was old school Kensington too. I was born and raised there. Like, she'd beat that into you. And she got diagnosed with breast cancer. So luckily this was around COVID time. So when everybody else was working from home, I was taking her to chemo, and me and my wife were back and forth, and eventually it progressed and it went to her brain, and there was really nothing that could be done. So we moved her in and we took care of her for those last 3 months, and it was rough. We were there for the last breath, everything, and it broke me a little bit. But what broke me a little bit more was when I was coming home from, we were picking out her urn because she was like, I want you guys to throw me into an Irish wind. We're like, oh, okay. And I got a phone call that my mentor had passed away from a heart attack. And it was like, in 1 week, 2 of the biggest pieces of my life, 2 of the biggest supports, the people that really like held me up when I was down, were just gone like that. And again, I was instantly not believing in God. And I was angry. And it was very soon after that I picked up a drink again. And it just started getting worse and worse. And it was getting to the point that, you know, my wife was flat out like, I've just lost my mom. You know, I understand what you're going through. And we had our losses between me and her too. She miscarried 3 times during this whole scenario. And I don't know how much I can deal with. And she had found me, you know, passed out downstairs, turning blue. And, you know, pretty much almost drank myself to death. And she was tired of it. And, you know, she was like, you need to get help. And I poo-pooed her for a little while, you know. I was really much in that aspect of us alcoholics and addicts are very, very good at building something so profound and so good, yet at the same time able to just destroy it within a small, minimal amount of time. And I was in that mode in my life. And I ended up coming here on a Saturday night, and one of the speakers really touched me, and it stuck. And that same night I met my sponsor, and I was still iffy on the whole God aspect of everything. And one morning I had been in the shower. That's usually where I do most of my thinking, that or, you know, the toilet. Either way, it's probably the only time I have some quietness in my household. We have a lot of pets. So it just dawned on me and kind of just clicked in my head of, you know, I had this whole lifestyle and this whole thought process that for how screwed up the world was, if there was a God, how would he let this happen? And it clicked that he didn't make any of this happen. This is all life, as well as all the screwed up stuff that's happening in society and around the world and everything. I mean, one is constantly told to me by my sponsor, it is not in my control. And two, if those people hadn't found God or followed the third step of following thy will, this is what it would look like. So do I want to be like that in the negative category, or do I want to just hand it over and let him take the wheel and follow that path to a more positive nature? And that was probably within the first 2-3 weeks, starting coming to meetings, talking to my sponsor daily. You know, admitting I was an alcoholic was not hard. Even when I abstained, I told people I was an alcoholic. That is why I don't drink. I could admit that easily. Putting in the step work, putting in the work to staying sober, that is where I faulted. That is where I faltered. That is where I completely collapsed in the end. There's a reason why this book was made. And it's probably one of the only books that was made, how many years ago? 85 years ago. And can still resonate to today. This can work for somebody who's a newcomer 20 years down from now. And it worked 85 years ago. There is no book out there that does that. I mean, you don't go back and look at something from 85 years ago and be like, oh yeah, you know. You look at books from 85 years ago and they're, you know, they were just like, their cars sucked. Like, you know, they didn't have Corvettes. They didn't have Lamborghinis. Look at the stuff now. Like, this sticks. It works. If you agree with it. If you put in the work to follow it. And I can say that from that moment, I have tried my hardest. I mean, there's days I falter. Everybody's going to falter a little bit. That's, again, life. That I have prayed every single morning the third step prayer, which is, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of thy bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. It doesn't say mine, it says thy. My way of thinking did not work. I thought that whole process, that whole time, my biggest line was, I got this. And the reality was I didn't. And it felt more freeing when I passed everything over and I let him take control. And I can say that now in 4 months, I've had maybe only 3 days of thinking of drinking, where during that 8 years of abstinence, I thought of it every single day, 5-6 times a day. Now I pray 5-6 times a day. And, that's really all I got. I'm rambling at this point.
No, that's fine.
So, give it up to God.
All right, thank you, Chris. Okay, so please limit your sharing to 3 minutes. Please keep your shares related to step 3. If you feel like drinking, or if you have had a drink today, please see me or speak to someone after the meeting. We ask that you please refrain from the use of profanity. We are in a church and on a spiritual journey. I'll open it up.